The village of Omaka was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other and no secret remained hidden for long. In a small mud house at the far end of the village lived Nkem, a strikingly beautiful young woman. Her beauty was the kind that made men stop and stare, and women whisper in envy. But beyond her physical charm, Nkem had very little. She was born into a poor family. She had spent her life fetching water from the stream, helping her mother fry akara by the roadside, and mending torn clothes for villagers for a small fee. Despite her struggles, Nkem had a deep longing for a better life. She hated poverty and constantly dreamed of escaping the village, of wearing fine clothes, eating expensive food, and living in a grand house. She believed she was destined for more than the simple life she lived. Her opportunity came when Madame Veronica, one of the wealthiest women in the village, noticed her. Madame Veronica had a son, Chuka, who lived in the city and had built a name for himself in business. He was wealthy, respected, and of marriageable age. Though many young women in the village had tried to catch his attention, his mother had the final say. And now her eyes were set on Nkem. Nkem, my daughter, Madame Veronica said one evening as she sat under a tree with her. How would you like to marry my son? Nkem's heart raced. Your son? She asked, feigning shyness while suppressing the excitement bubbling within her. Yes, my dear, you are a fine girl, well-mannered and hardworking. My son needs a wife, and I believe you will be a good match for him. That night, Nkem could hardly sleep. She had prayed for an escape from poverty, and now it was here. She would marry into wealth, and her life would change forever. A week later, Chuka arrived from the city. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded the aura of a successful man. Nkem watched from a distance as he greeted elders with respect, his voice deep and commanding. When he was introduced to her, he smiled politely. She's beautiful, he admitted, though he did not appear overly excited. Madame Veronica beamed with pride, and she's a good girl, well brought up. Chuka had no reason to refuse. His mother had never misled him, and if she believed Nkem was right for him, he would accept her. The wedding was simple. There was no elaborate celebration, no expensive bridal attire, just a small gathering of family and a few villagers. Nkem had no money to bring anything into the marriage, not even a travel bag filled with clothes. But none of that mattered. She was now a wealthy man's wife, and her dreams of a better life were finally coming true. As she stepped into her new home in the city, her eyes widened in admiration. The marble floors, glass chandeliers, and expensive furniture were unlike anything she had ever seen. This is my life now, she whispered to herself. She vowed that nothing, no one would ever take it away from her. At first, Nkem was quiet and observant. She played the role of the humble village girl, smiling sweetly and speaking respectfully. But as days turned into weeks, a shift began. She quickly adapted to the luxury around her, and before long she started behaving like she had always belonged there. She demanded the finest clothes, expensive jewelry, and trips to high-end restaurants. Chuka, wanting to make her happy, indulged her request without question. But with her newfound status came a change in her attitude. The humility she once displayed faded, and she began to see herself as superior to everyone, including her husband's family. It started with small things, rolling her eyes when his siblings visited, making excuses to avoid seeing his friends. Then one day, she outrightly refused to allow his younger sister Amaka into the house. "This is my home now," she told Chuka. "I don't want people coming here anyhow. We need our privacy." Chuka was surprised but said nothing. He didn't want to upset his wife, so he let it slide, but his family began to notice. "Nkem is changing," his mother remarked during a visit. "She doesn't seem like the sweet girl I thought she was." Chuka brushed it off. "She just needs time to adjust." But time only made things worse. Within a few months, Nkem had successfully isolated Chuka from his family. His siblings were no longer welcome, and even his mother's visits became less frequent. "Why do they always want to come here?" she complained one evening. "They should stay in their own homes and stop disturbing us." "They are my family," Nkem, Chuka said, frowning. "And I am your wife," she countered. "I should come first." His mother, worried about her son's growing isolation, tried to talk to him. "Chuka, my son, be careful. A good wife does not separate a man from his family." But Chuka, blinded by his desire to keep his marriage peaceful, ignored her warnings. Nkem was winning. Not only did Nkem push away Chuka's family, but she also began turning him against his friends and business associates. Whenever they visited, she was rude and dismissive. "Your wife is difficult," one of Chuka's friends, Ekene, told him after a particularly awkward visit. "She's just protective of our space," Chuka defended her. But soon the visit stopped. No one wanted to come around anymore. His phone, once constantly buzzing with calls from friends and business partners, became silent. Nkem, satisfied, smiled to herself. "Now he belongs to me alone," she thought. Little did she know, her selfishness would be her downfall. Chuka had always been a man of authority, well respected in his business circles and among his friends. But with each passing day, Nkem's influence over him grew stronger, reshaping him into someone unrecognizable. At first, it started subtly. She would ask him to help with minor chores around the house. "Chuka, please help me mop the floor," she would say sweetly. He obliged, thinking it was just part of being a supportive husband, but soon it escalated. "Mop the house before you leave for work," she ordered one morning. Chuka frowned. "Nkem, we have housekeepers for that. I don't want strangers cleaning my house. If you love me, you would do this for me." And so he did. The next time, it was washing the cars, then laundry. Soon, Chuka found himself scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and doing all the household chores, while Nkem sat comfortably, scrolling through her phone or watching TV. His employees noticed the changes in him. He was no longer the confident businessman they once knew. His clothes, always neatly pressed, were now wrinkled. His once lively personality was dull. Something was wrong. At the office, things were falling apart. Choka's business partners noticed that he had become withdrawn. He dismissed important meetings, barely responded to emails, and his once booming business started suffering. One evening, his closest friend Ekene visited his home to talk to him. "Inem, what is happening to you?" Ekene asked, concerned. "You've changed. We barely see you, and your business is suffering." Before Chuka could respond, Nkem stepped in. "He's fine," she said coldly, "and he doesn't need people like you distracting him." Ekene was stunned. "People like me?" "Yes," she snapped. "You come here pretending to care, but you are only looking for gossip." Chuka lowered his gaze. He wanted to defend his friend, but was too afraid to argue with Nkem. Ekene shook his head. "You're not the Chuka I used to know. I hope you wake up before it's too late." One by one, his friends stopped visiting. Business deals slowed down, and soon, Chuka began to feel the weight of isolation. But instead of fighting back, He retreated further into his silence. Chuka's mother, Madame Veronica, could no longer watch in silence. She had raised a strong man, not a puppet controlled by his wife. One afternoon, she decided to visit unannounced. As she stepped into the house, she was met with a shocking sight. Her son, the wealthy businessman, was scrubbing the floor while Nkem sat comfortably on the couch. Her heart sank. Chuka, she called, her voice trembling. What is the meaning of this? Chuka hesitated, then muttered, Mama, it's nothing. Nothing? You, a man, scrubbing the floor while your wife sits there doing nothing? Before he could respond, Nkem stood up. Madam, with all due respect, this is my home and you have no right to interfere, she said arrogantly. Madame Veronica's eyes widened. I see. So this is what you have turned my son into? Nkem rolled her eyes. He does these things because he loves me. If you don't like it, you can leave. Madame Veronica turned to her son. Chuka, you are a fool if you let this woman control you like this. A real man does not abandon his family and friends for a woman who disrespects him. Chuka looked away ashamed. From that day, his mother decided she would no longer plead. She knew that her son had to wake up on his own. Weeks passed, and things only got worse. Nkem no longer hid her disrespect. If Chuka did something she didn't like, she insulted him. If he tried to stand up for himself, she shouted louder. One evening, while Madame Veronica was visiting again, Nkem and Chuka got into an argument over dinner. I told you I wanted pepper soup, not this nonsense you brought home, Nkem yelled, throwing the food aside. Chuka sighed. Nkem, you could have just told me. There was no need to waste the food. Waste food? Are you stupid? She screamed. Madame Veronica, unable to watch any longer, stood up. Enough, Nkem. You will not speak to my son like that. And who will stop me? Nkem sneered. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Chuka across the face. The room went silent. Madame Veronica gasped in horror. You dare lay your hands on my son? Before she could react, Nkem turned on her. And if I did, Nkem smirked. Stepping forward, this is my house and I will do what I like. But Madame Veronica was not intimidated. You are a disgrace to womanhood. No wife treated her husband like this. Instead of backing down, Nkem lunged at her, slapping and pushing her. The elderly woman fell, hitting her elbow against the floor. Chuka, who had been frozen in shock, finally snapped. Enough, he roared, his voice shaking the walls. For the first time in months, the fire in his eyes returned. He helped his mother up and turned to Nkem. You have crossed the line, Nkem. This ends today. But Nkem laughed. What will you do? You are too weak to leave me. Chuka clenched his fist. We will see about that. That night, something changed in him. Chuka spent the night thinking about his life. How did he let things get this bad? How did he become a slave in his own home? The next morning, he decided he would start regaining control of his life. But fate had other plans. That evening, he arrived home earlier than usual and found the door slightly open. Confused, he stepped in quietly, and what he saw shattered his heart into a million pieces. There in his own house was Nkem, wrapped in the arms of another man. Not just any man, but Obinna, a former colleague from his struggling years. The man grinned shamelessly. Chuka, my friend, I didn't expect you home so early. Chuka felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Nkem, unbothered, stood up and smirked. Oh, please, don't act surprised. You should have known I was too beautiful for just one man. Obinna chuckled. She's been with me for months, my friend, and trust me, I am not the only one. The betrayal cut deep. Chuka had sacrificed everything for this woman, his friends, his family, his dignity, only to be repaid with humiliation. For the first time in a long time, Chuka felt anger rise in him, a burning righteous anger. You will regret this, Nkem, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Nkem laughed. Oh, please, what can you do? But she underestimated him. Choka had finally woken up. For the first time in a long time, Choka felt the weight of his blindness lift. The betrayal had shaken him to his core, but it also woke up the man he had once been. Nkem still smirked, confident that he would forgive her as he always did. Pack your things and leave, Choka said, his voice firm. Nkem scoffed. You must be joking. Obinna chuckled. Choka, you know she's not leaving. You're too weak for that. But something in Choka's eyes made even Obinna hesitate. You heard me, Nkem. Get out of my house. Nkem's expression changed. Choka, you're overreacting. Don't let one mistake ruin everything. Mistake? Choka laughed bitterly. You've been with multiple men while I slaved for you. You ruined my business connections, insulted my friends, humiliated me, and now you've brought a man into my house. Nkem folded her arms. And what will you do without me? Choka's lips curled into a smirk. Thrive. For the first time, Nkem felt a flicker of fear. Choka turned to Obinna. Get out before I call the police. Obinna, sensing the danger in his tone, left without another word. Nkem, you have 1 hour, Choka said, walking away. Nkem stood frozen, unable to believe that the man she controlled so easily had finally broken free. Word spread quickly through the family that Choka had finally sent Nkem packing. Madame Veronica, upon hearing the news, rushed to her son's house. She found Nkem still in the living room, pouting like a child. You're still here, Madame Veronica asked. Nkem glared at her. This is my home. Madame Veronica let out a cold laugh. Your home? Your home? The same home you turned into a prison for my son. No, Nkem, this is Choka's home. You brought nothing here and you will leave with nothing. Nkem's mouth opened in protest. I hope you didn't pack anything that doesn't belong to you, Madame Veronica added, her eyes sharp. Nkem clenched her fist. You're an old wicked woman. Madame Veronica stepped closer. And you are a disgrace to marriage. Look at you. Instead of respecting your husband, you turned him into a slave. Now, your wickedness has caught up with you. Just then, Choka walked in with a security guard. Escort her out, he ordered. The security guard stepped forward. Madam, please leave peacefully. Nkem, realizing she had no choice, stormed out of the house in shame. Madame Veronica turned to her son, her eyes softening. My son, you're free. Choka exhaled. He hadn't felt this free in years. Nkem had always thought she could survive without Choka, but reality hit her fast. She had no savings. Choka had paid for everything. She had burned bridges with everyone, including her family, whom she had once looked down on. She called her friends, but they ignored her. Without Choka's wealth, she was useless to them. She tried reaching out to Obinna, but he laughed. Did you think I would take care of you? You were just a distraction. He sneered. Nkem felt her world crumbling. With no money, no home, and no support, she was forced to return to the village in disgrace. With Nkem gone, Choka focused on rebuilding his life. His friends, seeing that he had finally freed himself, began reaching out again. Slowly, his business started recovering. One day, Ekene visited him. "You look like yourself again," Ekene observed. Chuka smiled. "I feel like myself again." Madam Veronica also saw the change in her son. "My son, you have learned a great lesson," she said. "Yes, Mama, a real man does not allow himself to be controlled by the wrong woman." Madam Veronica nodded. "And now you must move forward. There is life after Nkem." Chuka knew she was right. He had wasted enough time. Back in the village, Nkem struggled to survive. She tried returning to her old ways, flirting with men for survival, but no one wanted her. Her family, ashamed of her actions, refused to take her back. One evening, as she wandered the village streets, hungry and hopeless, she fell ill. Days later, a woman found her lying near the village market, too weak to move. Madam Veronica had the news and sent someone to check. When Chuka was informed, he signed, "I do not wish her harm, but I cannot save her." Nkem was taken to a small clinic, but it was too late. Malnutrition and illness had weakened her beyond recovery. Before she died, she whispered, "I had it all and lost everything." And with that, her story ended in tragedy. With Nkem gone, Chuka focused on rebuilding his life. He immersed himself in work, reestablishing connections with business associates who had distanced themselves due to Nkem's behavior. At first, some of them were hesitant, but as they saw the transformation in Chuka, they welcomed him back. His businesses, once struggling, started thriving again. Madam Veronica, ever the protective mother, watched closely. She was relieved but also cautious. "My son, you must be careful next time. A man must never give his power away," she advised. Chuka nodded. "I have learned, Mama. I will never make the same mistake again." He had been weak, but now he understood his words. Months passed and Chuka regained his former confidence. He no longer felt like the lonely, broken man he had once been. One evening, at a business conference in Abuja, he met Ifunanya, a beautiful and intelligent woman with a warm personality. She was nothing like Nkem. She was respectful, hardworking, and supportive. Unlike Nkem, who had been obsessed with wealth, Ifunanya valued character. They started spending time together, and for the first time in a long while, Choka felt the kind of love that didn't demand his submission, but instead uplifted him. Madam Veronica, upon meeting Ifunanya, approved instantly. "This one is a wife," she whispered to Choka. Choka smiled. This time, he would take things slowly. He wouldn't repeat his past mistakes. Nkem's downfall spread through the village like wildfire. Many women who had admired her boldness now used her story as a cautionary tale. The village elders often referred to her case when advising young women. "A woman should be a man's helper, not his downfall," one elder said during a village gathering. Even the young men learned from Choka's experience. They now understood the importance of choosing wisely. Meanwhile, Madame Veronica became a respected voice in the community, using her son's story to educate women about humility, respect, and the dangers of pride. News of Nkem's death eventually reached Choka. He had no hatred for her, only pity. When her body was brought back to the village for burial, there was no fanfare, no mourning crowd. Her family, who had once hoped she would elevate them, now buried her quietly, ashamed of what she had become. Madame Veronica attended, not out of obligation, but because she believed in seeing things to the end. As they lowered the coffin into the ground, she muttered, "Pride goes before a fall." And with that, Nkem's chapter was closed forever. A year later, Chuka married Ifunanya in a beautiful but modest ceremony. This time, there was no arrogance, no deception, just two people who truly valued each other. Madame Veronica, watching her son smile again, felt at peace. "My son has triumphed," she said. Chuka, standing beside his new wife, took a deep breath. Life had given him a painful lesson, but in the end, he had won. As they danced at the wedding, he realized something. Sometimes losing the wrong person is the best victory.